Hi, yes, my name's Zach Garner-Perkis. Welcome to the Rising Stars Roundtable. We've brought together some of it's the nominated Rising Stars for this year's category at the awards. And we've brought them together to discuss a pretty big question, which is how do you bring about positive change in construction? So each of the three people with me today have all made efforts to make some positive changes in the industry, and hopefully they're going to give us some insight into some of the things that they've learned at this critical time. So I think maybe if we kick things off with just each of you, going around each of you, if you just introduce yourself, say your name and your company, and just a little bit about why you were nominated for this award. So kick off with you, Alice.
Hi, I'm Alice Hands. I'm Head of Ethical and Sustainable Procurement at Sir Robert McAlpine. And I think I was nominated primarily around the work that I've been doing about how we respond to the Modern Slavery Act and the work that we've been doing with our supply chain on that.
Great, thanks. Grace.
Hi, I'm Grace Valentine. I was Head of Operations at Melt Property when I was nominated, but now I'm Head of Acquisitions. So what I've done over the past 12 to 18 months, which is probably a reason for the nomination, was building the business operation at Melt Property. So taking it from being a small boutique development business and really put into place those systems and structures within the company. And now I've kind of stepped back from the operation and I get to do the stuff that I love, which is acquiring and structuring development deals.
Thanks. Michael.
Yes, Michael Bryant, Commercial Director at Biosite Systems Limited, and I believe I was nominated for my help and support for the digital transformation of the construction industry, which essentially is by working with our customers to adopt technology solutions, and majority of those technology solutions I have been involved from a development or an innovation point of view.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the first question that we've got is what each of you feel is the kind of key factor in bringing about change in the industry, and hopefully all of you have described things that you've managed to get done. So an example of something that you've done that's worked particularly well with that. So I'll kick off with Alice.
Well, in regards to sort of tackling modern slavery, a key part of it is actually to create sort of awareness and educate people that there actually it's there, it's a problem, it's an issue in our industry. Because until I think people understand it, they can't identify it, and therefore they can't sort of recognize it. And by educating people, you empower them. And we've done that sort of a number of ways, and they're quite simple really, but it could be through first educating our own people, and that was across our whole entire operations through simple means as sort of e-learning. But then the main bulk of my work has been how we actually engage with the supply chain. And we're rolling out to continue rolling out an assessment program. But it's not simply about McAlpine imposing that on our supply chain. We we're part of that assessment program. And that is a really good engagement and education tool, because I think too often this is about talking about risk in our industry, and we often don't like to do that, and especially not openly. But I liken it to the sort of health and safety journey that the industry's been on. Now people are comfortable about talking about sort of health and safety, and they will raise it, and that's where we need to get with modern slavery or labour exploitation, but only by companies showing example and doing that. And therefore, by engaging with our supply chain and openly talking about the risk of modern slavery, we're hopefully breaking down those barriers and getting them to sort of open up more and increase that transparency that is really needed to tackle that. So it's sort of education and awareness is quite a general thing, but there are many different sort of facets that you can enact in that and do, and it's making sure that you continue that conversation and engage with all the different players in the business and in the supply chain to make sure that transparency is increased.
I'm wondering, Alice, have you found that people have light bulb moments, or is it something that's slower than that?
Yeah, I think initially, when even if you sort of talk to people about it and you give them examples and you show them basic things, they suddenly start to realise that okay, yes, this is an issue. And for me, the light bulb moment was when the Modern Slavery Act came out, and I started having to respond, from our business perspective, respond to it. And you very quickly become aware that actually our business model in terms of all the levels of subcontracting doesn't help. And majority of people, they start to realize that, okay, we do have potential issues in our industry. Where we sit, it's often further down the supply chain, but you've got to start working with your direct contractors to then get down in that supply chain to where the issue might sort of potentially present itself. And the light bulb moment's often been, you say to people, even majority of the workforce in construction are sort of self-employed. And there's this realization that when you bring people onto a site, you're responsible for their health and safety. And I say to people, this is the health and safety of an individual, it's their well-being. And that's often when the light bulb moment kicks in. It's not just, are you putting them to work safely? Have they had their method statement? Do they understand it? But actually, are they okay? Are they in the right state of mind? And are they being treated fairly? And that's often when the light bulb moment comes.
Thanks. Grace, you've worked with like quite complicated supply chains, or understood the kind of lack of communication that it can be. In terms of some of the things that you've noticed in terms of changing that or bringing about positive change, I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what Alice is saying there around communication, education, transparency, conversation, all of that stuff. And I think that sort of translates across all of the work that us three do. But for me, I get more involved, at least at the moment, on the acquiring and structuring of the development sites that we do. And continually, the barrier that I come up against is that landowners will have a view that their land is worth a certain amount. Quite often, estate agents will then can't actually get those sites across the line, because then there's an unrealistic view of what land is worth. And as a result of that, it means that we're building less homes and less of these sites are coming to fruition. But we have a major housing crisis here in the UK, where I think we're targeted to build around 200,000 new homes each year. And for the past decade or so, we haven't come anywhere near close to that. So I see a real big communication issue with I guess the whole supply chain in that sense of the landowner, agent and developer as well, because ultimately it means that we're just not helping to meet those housing targets. So what I do now, being in the acquisition side of the business, is really focus on having that direct communication and relationship with the landowners. Even if we are occasionally going through agents for sites, I always have a non-negotiable. I have to have a direct relationship and direct line of communication with the person that I'm doing business with, i.e. the landowner or the vendor, because we need to be able to have a serious, one-on-one conversation, figure out a win-win approach to get some of these sites across the line, which in some cases are a bit more trickier or a bit more complex, and only the really experienced developers have an understanding of the structuring of those deals and how we can use different techniques and strategies to get them across the line. So that's something that I've really worked on over the past 12 to 18 months as part of the property business, is focusing on those relationships with landowners and with the professionals that we work with, and really I guess having that open, honest, transparent communication and saying, these are our build costs, this is the finance costs, everything that goes into a project. We have a set profit margin that we can't budge from. So ultimately, this is why the land is worth what it's worth. Now, if someone else comes along and says otherwise, that's fine. But what I quite often see time and time again happens is that other developers will come along and do that, and they'll get it right up to the point of about to be going ahead on a particular project, but then the finance won't be able to come through because they'll realize that the land value, once they go for the valuation, isn't worth what was being offered and put on the table, and they'll then come back with all the detailed build costs and everything and realize that actually the project isn't viable. So it's about having those conversations earlier on so that we can unlock some of these sites and help solve the housing crisis.
I'd be interested to know, in terms of, one of the things you mentioned is the relationship that you have in the business case. I'd wonder in terms of like trying to convince people of, thinking in a more kind of holistic way, which is the crucial factor for you? Is it the relationship, or is it just that strength of the business case?
It's the relationship. So, I mean, obviously you've got to have a business case and numbers and the knowledge to back it up, but it's more having the direct relationship with the people that you're doing business with and being open and honest and transparent. Because if you don't have that, then quite often people will think that you're trying to pull the wool over their eyes, or that, you know, it's just the big nasty developer coming in trying to make a bunch of money, which it's not the case. It's okay, we want to do a deal here and we want it to be win-win and we want to get these homes built, but it's a case that it has to work for everybody that's involved. And it is more about having that open and honest communication. And a recent meeting that I was doing with the landowner was just sitting in a pub, showing my spreadsheets, had the laptop out, we all had a beer, and was just having that communication. I think when you can break down those barriers and speak to each other one-on-one as just people, then that can really help a deal to get across the line, rather than I guess keeping everything kind of hidden and behind the scenes and all that, because it's just not, in my experience, it's not the way that business happens properly.
Coming to you, Michael, you've done lots of stuff in connection with safety that can be quite hard to change people's minds or help them to think in different ways about that. I wonder, in terms of like some of the things that Alice and Grace have mentioned there, in like how you found it in terms of, like, you know, making people think in a different way about safety and fire safety.
Yeah, I think I mean, if I remember, the question was around obviously key factors about bringing change in the industry, and I think I've made some notes on both what Alice and Grace said, things that kind of resonate with me. What Alice mentioned around awareness, understanding and educating is definitely a huge component about it. But on Grace's point around the expectation and assumptions made from people about information that is available to them can also be, I guess, either a massive positive or a negative, depending on what information that they've got available to them, to be able to get back to that understanding of the situation that they may find themselves in, and some examples where I can demonstrate where that, some examples where I've got something that's potentially worked well. There's probably two. One's on the technology front, and the other is in the fire. So, and I think on the element of that understanding and education, that's actually, for me, that's twofold. And what I mean by that is not just the end user, if you like, whether that be the construction management team or the principal contractor or possibly even the client, but also the supply chain. And we're a perfect example of that, because technically, we as a business, we sit in the supply chain. So our clients will be principal contractors. And we can't evolve and develop without, information from them. And that leads back to one of my examples, which is around the fire system, which was a kind of a light bulb moment of mine, going back a few years ago now. I was on a project in Reading, and I witnessed an evacuation, a fire evacuation, middle of the way through the day. I was on site for something else. And during that evacuation, obviously, I was able to kind of watch the situation unfold from a third party point of view. I don't work on a construction site. I'm not normally involved in construction, and sometimes that third party, uneducated point of view can often be a real kind of eye opener. Thankfully, it was a false alarm. But what my takeaway point from it was a quite a chaotic situation, and then a real emergency, should I say. Could have been, quite a different outcome. So after that incident, I went back, and fortunate enough in Biosite, we have our own R&D team, was able to take away my findings and have a kind of around the table discussion around developing of a fire alarm and evacuation system. But one of the main problems on this particular element of site was the fact that the fire alarm was actually used for someone that was injured on a floor that didn't have any other means of communication, which obviously had the opposite effect of actually getting someone to them from a first aid point of view. So we took into account the kind of the installation factors, etc., and ended up developing what is known today as the Mercury product, which is our wireless fire and first aid solution. And that has, since its inception, we've now sold over I think probably that's in excess of £7 million worth, which is probably about 25,000 actual physical call points, which has been fantastic. But our main focus was obviously on the the technology and what that can do for change for construction sites. And obviously it was an alternative in elements of protection. So to answer your question, obviously that is, where, a key demonstrable example of where we've worked with a client. Again, coming back to Alice's element about the understanding and the education of, okay, what are the actual challenges and what can we do to change them, and what can we do to bring technology to change them. But as I said, on Grace's points, our expectation and assumptions, so not even on the client side, but our expectation and assumption on what was actually required ended up being different. And the only way we were able to solve that was through better collaboration. So looking at kind of now and next, we need to build momentum on our response to safety incidents, and or obviously where we find ourselves now, which is the main element is COVID. And I think COVID's given us a perfect example to show that rapid change is possible. Pre-COVID, I think, changing culture was slow, but the industry has demonstrated that it is actually possible to change fast. So from our perspective, technology and digitization is crucial to this.
Just interesting that you mentioned the first time that you were an outsider. What role do you think that played? Do you think that was really critical?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And probably the two main reasons for that was, I think, and we're all guilty of this in our own, day-to-day lives, is you can get, when you are the situation or you're in the situation, your perspective of the situation is obviously what you're used to. So you naturally make many assumptions as an individual. So for me, when I saw this incident unfold, I'd never been on a site that had had an evacuation. I'd never written or been involved in writing a fire risk management plan or anything that was associated with that. So I saw it unfold, and naturally then for me there was loads of questions going around in my head. So when I was sat down with the management team of that particular project post the incident, I was coming at it from I had no experience in that particular element of it. So the questions that I were asking, albeit some of them may well have been simple, allowed to have a completely different approach on perhaps what a resolution for the problem was, or even possibly what the problem was in the first place. So having that outsider's kind of experience, outsider's lack of experience and point of view, perhaps maybe then was allowed us as a business, but also the client, to potentially shine a light on what actually was the problem there, rather than everyone being kind of so used to being in it as part of their day job. So I don't think, if I'd have been on the other side of the table, I probably wouldn't have had the ideas that I'd have had. But obviously collaboration in relation to that technology and our clients being open and honest with us was massive for us to be able to actually have that innovation in the first place, which, as I've said, massively resonates with both Alice and Grace's points of view around, understanding the problem, educating and awareness, but also expectation and assumptions based on information available. And our expectation and assumptions on the information available at the time was that there wasn't an issue. But then when we were able to witness that there quite clearly was, and we could, bring some developmental change to the product that would alleviate those issues.
Brings us nicely to the next point, which, Alice, I wonder, in terms of, did you have to take an outsider's perspective when you were kind of doing some of the things that you were doing, and what you noticed was the biggest obstacle to change? Was it the culture within this sector, or was it the way that it's set up? I know you've touched on in terms of the way that the supply chain was set up, but what was the kind of key thing that you needed to try and affect?
Well, Nick, listening to what Michael said about, when you're in a situation, your perspective of that situation could be seen that it's okay. And I think when you look at construction and you look at, in terms of the practice of, our business model, the numerous levels of subcontracting is one reason why construction is high risk and has been deemed as high risk to the prevalence of modern slavery, and that is our business model. We need to acknowledge that. And in terms of culture, and I think this is really interesting. It's arguably, have we for too long allowed certain practices, labour practices, to occur because it suits it links in with the business model, it suits the business model, but actually do those practices also mean that if you've got unscrupulous people in the supply chain, people can be easily exploited? So I think it very strongly links to what Michael said, like when you're in something, your perspective of it is, oh, maybe it's okay, but actually you need to take yourself, remove yourself from that and look at it from the outside or from a different sort of perspective. And I think that's the challenge. And that's been the challenge when we especially engage with the supply chain, saying just because this has been this is the way you do things for however many years, doesn't mean that's what we need to do, continue to going forward. And actually we need to address X, Y, and Z, because actually X, Y, and Z means that people potentially, if they're vulnerable, are more likely to be exploited. So yeah, it's taking that different perspective and trying to step outside the box that you're in, and look at how you can challenge it from a different angle, really.
Just bringing in Grace there, you've discussed in terms of like the importance of relationships. I'd be interested to get your take on that same question in terms of how do you try and change the culture, or is it what way do you see it? Is it a cultural thing? Is it a practice thing? Do you get the relationship and then try and enact change?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't come from a construction background historically at all. I come from a business, corporate marketing, business strategy background. So coming into this, I mean, I can relate very much to what the guys are saying there, is I was almost an outsider, but then that made me ask a bunch of questions, going, well, why is everything done this way? And why haven't people tried directly speaking to landowners, or tried taking a step back and structuring the businesses in the right way to enable you to scale, rather than taking on all this unnecessary risk? So when I got involved initially on the operational side of things, it was very much observing, seeing what was working, what wasn't working, and how I could bring in some of my corporate experience to then help the business to scale up. So I think I said at the start, initially it was taking a property developer and turning that into a property development business. And I think a lot of the time people in development, the focus is the next deal, doing one thing after another, and keeping on going that way. A lot of the time doing everything yourself and not being so good at delegating and bringing on board sort of other people, systems and processes to help a business to scale up. So really what does help a business to scale up is by taking that step back, looking at, okay, where are we trying to get to? Where's north? What are we trying to do? And what are all the different things that we need to put into place for that to happen? And because I'm not from this background, it then meant that I was able to bring in actual sort of experience that's worked in the corporate world and bring that to almost in a way a startup business. Even though the company's been around for about 20 odd years, it was taking it to be actually, have system, have structure, and have processes in place. And I think it's a combination of the two, because for us it was just more, when you're doing something day in and day out, you're very much stuck in your ways, and you almost need to either take a step back or have someone else come on board and shake things up and ask, even a case of just asking the questions like, why is something done that way? Or, have you tried sourcing sites directly, or speaking to landowners, or putting in these different ways to mitigate risk in the deals, so that we're not, putting our necks on the line here for the sake of it. So on the business side, I guess that's what I've done on the operations, but even on the acquisition side of things, I mean, it just came really clear to me straight away that, anything that I was looking at wasn't fitting the needs of the business, and the sites didn't have any margin in them, and we wouldn't be able to do any of these projects. Then it was more a case of asking the question, okay, if we're going to have sites coming in, if we want to do these projects, how are we going to get them across the line? And in that case, then it was building more the relationship with the landowners and being really clear on what our strategy was with that, so that then we could be much more targeted and efficient with the time that we used. But as the guy said, when you're in this stuff day to day, like day in, day out, you don't always pick up, I guess, the potential issues or the things that need to be done, because you're just so focused on being on the treadmill. So almost, COVID coming in, as much as there's been many negatives from that, in some ways there's been some positives by both speeding up some of the change that's needed to happen, or that people have recognised that's needed to happen, but hadn't actually got off our backsides and done until we've almost had to do.
Yeah, interesting. Michael, you talked about that quite compelling story in terms of getting a bit of perspective to, or being able to see something more clearly. I was wondering, Grace just touched on it there, the kind of role that technology plays in being able to quantify certain things and then realize lots of things that are missing and then be able to change them because you can see them in the first place.
Yeah, technology's been a huge player in it, obviously from our point of view. Again, coming back to there's a reoccurring theme here about awareness and education, and that I think is a large part of technology's role, is to provide that, or certainly provide the information that then gives people the awareness to then make potentially better informed or more informed decisions. We all base our decisions on the information that is available to us, and one thing that technology does is allow us or bring us data to then aid those decisions. And I think a perfect example of that from my perspective and Bioscience perspective is a project we worked on. I would say probably going back over a year ago now, and again, it came from clients sharing their challenge with us, and it was around information on operatives and on the workforce, and decisions being made in relation to programs and budgets combined, which were huge project decisions. And a lot of those decisions were made off of either black book data, which is from bid teams that have been around for a significant number of years, with a number of experience. But obviously, as we've seen, certainly more so in the last few months, things can change rapidly, and people's perspectives can change rapidly. So we spent some time understanding those challenges, which was around visibility of data and number of operatives, qualifications, people's trades. And one thing we quickly worked out is this data is actually already available, and it was through the product of access control, which was number of individuals on site, their qualifications, their trade, etc. And we then ended up creating a product called Biosite Sense, which is a very similar to a business intelligence tool to allow our customers to get visibility of that data, but not just in a real time live on site element, also analyzation of that historically. And I think it's fair to say that when we worked on this project, I don't think we expected the massive positive outcome that came from it at the beginning, but also to see the reactions of perhaps some of the subcontractors that were involved in then visibility of that data was huge. Again, comes back to that point about awareness. They thought they had certain problems and challenges, which then the data then brought to light. Actually, maybe your problems are slightly different than what you actually thought. So, technology for me plays a massive role in that. But at the same time, the technology needs to be adopted and understood. But also, technology also brings some potential negatives to the possibly to the table, in terms of then don't get too ingrained in technology. So it's about understanding, or for me certainly, it's about understanding the technology and its application, and using it in the right way for positivity and change. But I certainly think I guess coming back to one of the previous comments, is technology in a way possibly plays that role of that empty chair, in the sense of that third person view, or that third party view from someone that's not necessarily in the day-to-day mix of it. And technology can do that by giving you the data, or certainly clean data, which then obviously, as I say, allows our customers to certainly then have a more informed view of change.
Great. We've mentioned COVID a number of times. Alice, I've been wondering, in terms of some of the efforts that you've been making, has there been any change in the reaction to it pre-COVID, post-COVID?
I think everyone has acknowledged that COVID's it's had this huge impact on people, and what it's done generally, I think, has those that were already vulnerable, it's almost exasperated their vulnerability, and it's put a lot more people made a lot more people vulnerable. And when you look at labour exploitation and modern slavery, the common theme about somebody who is exploited is they are vulnerable at some point. That vulnerability can be lots of different things, but they have an element of vulnerability to them. So yes, COVID is a huge concern in terms of the increase in issues, not just in our industry, obviously, but across the business sector and in the UK. And I think, obviously looking down the line in a few months, and Brexit as well, that the implications of what does that mean for the labour market, the uncertainty there. So I think you put those two things together, the issue and the sort of prevalence of exploitation is only going to increase, and that is the thought. So we need to acknowledge that. And in terms of what we're doing at the moment, we've had to change, a lot of the programs that we have in place. A lot of them were face-to-face, the sort of, if it was our assessments with the supply chain, we're now doing them obviously over Teams, which, it's still good. It's got a different element to it. But the key thing is, how do we ensure that we still talk to the people on our sites? We provide those avenues of communication, of if they want to raise a concern. And I think that is the main challenge, and making sure, just because we're a lot more remote potentially at the moment, because people are working from home, you have less people on site. It doesn't mean that people aren't there, that they're not assessing things, and it doesn't mean that people can't still raise things. But so therefore, I think it's still really important to make sure you have a presence, but we're going to have to do that, and I'm doing that slightly differently and through different means. And as Michael says, technology is key to that, but it's still making sure we have that presence. We've got eyes and ears everywhere, because yes, COVID is only going to have, increase the people that potentially probably could be exploited because of that vulnerability element. So it's key.
Great. So you mentioned that there were some positives that have actually come from COVID in terms of being able to take a look at the business in a different way, or actually suddenly having the time to do that. And if you could speak a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we already worked remotely a lot of the time anyway. So for us, it wasn't such a big shift compared to other businesses. And that's kind of how it was set up. What it's meant for us is that we don't have to be so location driven about where people are based in terms of hiring. Obviously, for people working on site, that's a slightly different thing. But for us, we've got team members who are based in Turkey. We've got team members based in the Midlands. I'm down in Surrey. So we can be all over, I guess, the country, and in some cases all over the world, which means that we're not driven by, someone who has to be within 30 minutes to an hour from London to get to central head office, because we kind of worked remotely anyway, and then maybe occasionally we go into London for team meetings. So for us, it's meant that we can bring in the right people for the business to fulfill those roles, and also, I guess, save on operational costs too. From, I guess, even the marketing of the development sites that we have, it's again helped us to be a lot more efficient with people. For, I guess, initially the first lockdown as well, not being able to go out and view in person, it's meant that we can do virtual tours and walkarounds of the properties and of the show home that we have, so that then we're not having, say, 100 people to come and view. We've got 50 people who are coming to view, but we know that those people have had to pass the initial test and they've seen the interiors. And so we know that the ones that are actually then coming in person are real legitimate buyers who are really interested in the product. But on the operational side, that helps us out as well, because it means that we don't have to, frankly, we don't have to pay a sales rep to do 100 viewings. We pay them to do half the amount of viewings, but we know that those are a good use of the budget, because those people are much more engaged with the product. So for us, it's helped on that front, both in terms of just who we have in the team. On the sales and marketing side, we've been much more efficient with our processes, and it's made us think much more creatively. And depending on how you look at it, fortunately or unfortunately, this situation that we're in, and unfortunately, means that a lot of businesses, especially on the high street, aren't going to survive what we're going through at the moment. I guess then the opportunity for that for developers then means that there's an opportunity for us to repurpose those buildings on the high street and to make them more fit for purpose moving forward. So already we've seen a shift in how UK high streets operate, but moving to that being more experiential type stores and shops and so on, rather than being a place where people can buy well, if it's a clothing store, everyone can now buy that online. So it's more changing, I guess, the businesses that we have on the high street, but also making use of the uppers above the shops and so on, and making it more fit for purpose for what High Street 2021 and so on looks like. So there is a lot of opportunity that's come from COVID. Some of it, you know, unfortunately does mean that businesses won't survive, as the guys kind of touched on before. But, you know, I guess that's kind of what we see every decade or so when we go through the financial crises and the economy dipping, is then a change and a restructure of how the UK and sometimes globally things look.
Right. And Michael, how's it been for you?
Yeah, I think coronavirus has obviously presented many challenges, and it's been a difficult time for everyone. I think it's definitely shown how resilient and responsive the industry can be. Going back to one of the things we said earlier was obviously around, you know, people's willingness to change, but obviously, you know, coronavirus has forced people to change, and both, you know, within construction and other sectors. And I think it's given people a kind of a subconscious confidence that rapid change is possible, and that, you know, things might have been, you know, intimidating or not essential or laborious before coronavirus. You know, like technology, it can actually be really beneficial. And I think, you know, both in response to COVID and generally. And we've seen our customers definitely becoming more receptive to technology, but through need as opposed to want. Whereas obviously previously it was more of a, you know, want as opposed to need, which obviously slowed down the change, or at least the effort to change. And because now they've needed to use technology to adhere to safe working practices, or, you know, or maintain project progress with a large portion of the, you know, delivery team potentially working remotely, or certainly some restricted numbers on site, you know, they've had the opportunity to see the positive impact that can have on a project in general, but also been a little bit more open-minded with actually adapting to that change, and, you know, and that shift towards technology. But as I said, that's, you know, been forced in a way because of COVID. But I think, you know, looking beyond COVID, if we can keep that culture of kind of open-mindedness that COVID has kind of brought to the table, I definitely think that you know, the disruption that the pandemic has brought could definitely have a, you know, huge positive impact in the long-term kind of culture of adapting in the construction industry, whether that be technology or not. So even though, you know, we're all dealing with the impact of the pandemic, I think in years to come, this period hopefully will be seen as a step change for the industry, and definitely a milestone in accelerating positive change for sure.
Brilliant, nice point to end it on. So I'll just say thank you to Alice, thank you to Grace, and thank you to Michael.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Yeah, take care.